This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I am here today joined by three very special guests, all the way from Short Hills Bench, Niagara. I have the Speck brothers, Matthew, Paul, and Daniel. How are the three of you today, gentlemen?
Fantastic. Excellent. Thank you.
Gentlemen, today we're going to be tasting the 2021 Henry Of Pelham Family Estate Baco Noir, the Speck Family Reserve. Now, the Speck family have been synonymous with Baco Noir for quite some time. Tell us a bit about your relationship with Baco Noir.
Well, it's funny because when we planted the vines that this wine is made from in 1984, we were young, and our parents didn't know anything really, didn't know a whole lot about wine. They liked wine, but they weren't in any way, shape, or form experts. And one of the local growers, they wanted to make a medium body red, and they asked a couple of the local growers around us here which one should they consider planting. At that time in the 80s, vinifera was, vinifera red in particular was highly experimental. Riesling and Chardonnay were, gaining some real world traction, but the reds were still highly experimental. And the growers started planting Baco Noir, so we planted about 14 acres, and we hand shoveled this in, me and Matt and Dan. And we went to make the first wine. We did something that at the time Baco Noir was not being taken so seriously, and we kept the yields down low. We let it ripen to an extreme level relative to what had been practiced, and then we aged it in American oak, in a new American oak, and it kind of created this fruit bomb with some tannin from the barrels, and it became sort of a calling card for us. Everywhere we went where we were pouring wine, that was the one people were most interested in. And so we just kept making more of it and kept working on it, mostly in the vineyards. Matt can speak more to that, but and it just continues to be an overwhelmingly interesting, different wine. It's the one we export around the world the most. It's the one that wine writers from all over the world, or restaurateurs, or just wine enthusiasts, when they come here, they definitely want to experience this and try this wine. And it's just, what I love about it is it's not Pinot Noir. It's not part of the 5 or 6 or 8 grape varieties that we seem to pigeonhole ourselves into globally.
Yeah.
And it brings something different to the table.
Well, my first introduction to Baco Noir would have been almost 30 years ago, and a very fresh-faced Dan Speck turned up at the Granite Club, where I was working as sommelier, and my voice hadn't dropped at this point. And Dan there was trying to introduce me to this great Baco Noir, and I guess I think it was perhaps even a little bit of a snob back then, because I was like, "What is this? What is this thing he's trying to sell me?" He's saying, "No, it's really popular." I'm like, "Oh yes." I'm like, "What is this thing?" Because I'd never smelled anything. I mean, coming from the UK, exposure to even Californian wines was a relative rarity. I mean, there were only a few on our list at that point, way back then in the sort of mid-late 90s. But I remember my first taste of Baco Noir. You brought a couple of them along, I think, Dan, way back in the day. And I came to realize that you made the best Baco Noir, hands down, that was head and shoulders over any of the other Bacos that I ever tasted. And it's interesting that you've continued with the Baco Noir to this day. So it obviously has quite a following.
Does, and it's today it's a third of our actual planted vineyards.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah.
And so it's not that we've continued, we've doubled down, but it's our customers telling us that, and ever more premium price points and expressions. And as Paul said, our biggest exported wine is actually Baco. It's not ice wine. It's this, and we have places like Belgium and Denmark and even into parts of Asia.
Airlines, Aer Lingus. Aer Lingus.
Yeah, Aer Lingus. So Aer Lingus carried both. It has several tranches, periods. Carried both the Baco and our classic Chardonnay, the one that just got the award.
Interesting. Is the style of wine that would perform well at altitude, I guess. I hadn't thought about that before. Yes, yeah, with that.
Tannin thing, and we were talking about air pressure, a separate conversation, right?
Now,
it was really fit there, yeah.
would it be fair to say that your Bacos have changed over the decades because it's now quite a polished wine?
That's the one to speak to that. I think so. Yeah, I mean that's the challenge and the opportunity with this grape is to you're always trying to harness and manage there's wildness in this variety. There's an untamed character to it. That can be a plus and a minus. So you're always trying to, how do you harness that to make a wine that's not completely unruly, but also is interesting. I think as Paul was saying, it's in the same discussion. The advent of technology and process and winemaking globally, it's been great for overall wine quality around the world. Let's face it, wine quality has never been better around the world. But there's a little bit of a homogenization also, I think, can come with that. And it gets harder and harder to make a wine that really truly distinguishes itself. I think that's just an ever harder, gross thing to do. But with this grape, we really have this great tablet opportunity to make a wine like that. So, and it starts in the vineyard. Again, there's nothing fancy happening in the winery with this one. It's really all about the fruit, the grape. There's no grape that's more important for us to grow ourselves, actually, than Baco. It's difficult to source this fruit throughout the peninsula. We do buy some, but for all the tiers of this wine that we make, it's anywhere from 100% like this one from our own vineyard to even 75, 80% of our grapes, even in our classic tier Baco. It's about harnessing the fruit. The vine, Baco Noir as a vine is prolific. It wants to grow a large canopy, large leaves, wants to produce a lot, and you need to have it on site or location of soil that will keep the vine smaller. And then you do things in the vineyard, no-till, no fertilization, no fertilizing, very little fertilizing to no fertilizing, no tillage. Everything we can do in the way we prune and trellis the vine is different. And to sort of harness that canopy without shading the fruit and not allow the vine to produce too much. And just like any other vine, trying to get balance. And Baco is like a wild. Baco is like a wild horse.
It's a wild, untamed beast.
I think that's appeal, right? That's part of its appeal for sure.
Yeah.
With this tier of wine, the Speck Family Reserve, is that barrel selection or vineyard selection?
So two things that matter. This is from the first planting that Paul's alluding to that we planted back in 1984. First vineyard, and the first vineyard is a fairly large, close to 14 acres. It's one planting, but the vineyard itself, this is prior our land preparation and the way we developed vineyards back then was not as involved as it is now. To say the least.
Right.
After drinking the back's blue all night, troubles and draw a line plant. So things are, not perfectly straight. But most importantly, in that vineyard, Swen Valley cuts through it on an angle, which honestly is managing a vineyard, but again, we didn't know any better, so we planted right through that. But the western third of that vineyard is on the west side of that swale, and in Niagara, and almost all our vineyards have their aspect to the lake is north facing. Because the swale cuts through this vineyard, the aspect of that portion of the vineyard is south facing.
Right.
And we have this section of the vineyard with a south facing slope to it, and then this great drainage. And it just so happened over years and years and years, we noticed that that section of vineyard was better. And so we started harvesting it separately.
Yeah.
And this wine also then gets 50% brand new oak barrels. That goes brand all American, so it's 50% new, and the balance will be second and maybe some third year, but not much. And it stays in for a year to 18 months.
Has the oak treatment changed over the years?
Not a lot. I mean, the only thing that's changed is we used to use way back when we started, the days Paul was alluding to. We just bought the entry level World Cooperage barrels, which were they're basically bourbon barrels, right? And back in the early 90s, pretty rustic too, and we like them to extent because we like the rusticness. They're a bit too rustic, so we use American barrels, so that hasn't changed. If we want some of the stronger the spice and things that come with American oak, but we use the premium American barrels for this program now. So we don't use and World Cooperage as a company actually produces premium barrels. So probably a 24-month dry aging, 36 months. Those are better to your toasting of the heads.
Their overall quality has improved as they started out, as Matt said, as really a bourbon barrel manufacturer. And in the 80s and 90s, when bourbon production was going south, they got into wine. And so it took them a while to evolve into the type of wine barrels that we're used to. And so we work with them on them.
Well, this wine here, I can remember when I used to drink it, I always loved it as a barbecue wine. But it's interesting with this Speck Family Reserve in this vintage. I was talking about it being extremely polished. It seems like a slightly elevated wine today. I'm not sure. I mean, I've not tasted this for a little while, but it's. I think it really deserves a place at the table. Where would you be putting this yourselves?
I mean, it fits it. I agree. Like we have kind of a couple ranges of Baco. I think this one for me is almost Syrah-like or something. They're the kind of foods I would eat with that. I mean, if you want to put Wellington to a like for sure all the classic things off the Cuban. It's not just sweet and spicy, right? It's got acidity to it as well, and berry characters like venison.
I was about
like
to say into gamey territory for me. I've never thought of pairing it like that before, and now I'm out in the country. I have a lot more access to game, especially at this time of year. So I think that's why I'm going to save this until maybe. Yeah.
This interesting Baco is the red wine you can put with tomato.
Yeah.
It's not high in tannin. It has more acidity, so it can allow itself to go with tomato sauce. So for me, I love tomato sauce.
Yeah.
Tomato sauce. Tobacco is one of those few reds that can fit nicely.
Well, this is excellent. This is a great reintroduction to Henry Of Pelham Baco. Thanks very much.
Sure. Thanks.